Hi, this is Mashnu, and this is example number 7 of the series How to Attack. And in this example it's all about weakening the dark squares and making use of the dark squares to attack the enemy king. As you can see in this position, White has placed his pieces with the idea of playing f5. So that's why this knight is standing on e3 and the rook on the f-file, and the move f4 has been played. And that's exactly what White did here. He played f5, and this move is not meant to trade on g6, although that could be an idea. In some games we see this idea of opening an f-file, but no, the idea of White is actually a bit deeper. It's to advance the pawn to f6, sacrificing this pawn and weakening later these two squares f6 and h6. And maybe it's not clear yet how this is going to happen, but in a few moves you will see what the plan was of White and how it worked. Now Black here played queen to b6, and before continuing the attack, White moved his king away from this diagonal b6 to g1, king to h2. Actually, White is saying with this that his plan is to at some point maybe advance this pawn later and moving this knight away from e3, and he doesn't want to have this pin with the queen pointing at g1. Now Black played here bishop to e8, and now the attack started with f6, sacrificing a pawn, and this pawn sacrifice is actually just a preparation for the real main move, and that is that after bishop takes f6, White played here rook takes f6, sacrificing the exchange and really weakening now the dark squares around the black king. So h6 and f6 are weak now, and g7 as well. So later, if we see now this bishop is on b2 in this diagonal, and later this can be used for the attack, especially if we get the white queen on h6. Now, of course, another option would be to take here with the e pawn, e takes f6, but also in that case more or less the same idea works. First playing knight to g4 and then later capturing on f6. Let's go back to the game. Bishop takes f6, rook takes f6, e takes f6, knight to g4. Now I'll go back one move, because another idea would be here to play d5. d5, opening this diagonal that looks very attractive, but the thing is that Black can block then the diagonal by moving the knight to e5. So White needs to be careful and not only think about how he's going to attack, but also considering every possibility of defense for Black. Knight to g4 was played in the game, and Black found an interesting defense, and that is the move d5. So what he's doing, he's opening the 6th rank. So after later removing the knight from c6, the queen will be defending f6. I'm sorry. White reacted here with queen to h6, and this is very consistent, because it would be, of course, also an idea to take on f6 right now. But the thing is that if then Black moves the king to g7, Black has a bit of control of these two squares, f6 and h6, and that's what I find. Why I find the beauty of this example is that White plays a very clear dark square domination. First moving the queen to h6 now, and now of course threatening knight takes f6, followed by queen takes h7. And black defended the way he planned, knight to e7, the queen protecting f6. And at this point the white player played rook to f1, so bringing more pieces into the attack, pressuring the f6 pawn. By the way, the white player here was Grandmaster Tartakower, and he was playing against Mr. Broadbent. Now, I must honestly say that I've never heard of Broadbent before. He's not a very well-known player, I think, but Tartakower, of course, is a famous Grandmaster. Now, the game continued here with rook to d6. So black tries to defend more and more this pawn on f6. And let's have a look at another possibility, and that is to play f5 here. In that case, white simply takes on f5, because after knight takes f5, the follows rook takes f5. Again, an exchange sacrifice, and after g takes, then knight to f6 check and mate in the next move, unless black sacrifices the queen on f6. So this f5 doesn't work because of this idea. Rook to d6 was played in the game, and now white continued with the move e5. So again, putting pressure on these dark squares. Knight to f5 was played. Now let's see what happens if f takes on e5, and then simply white takes again with the pawn. And after rook to e6, the knight can give a check on f6, and if black returns the exchange by taking on f6, then e takes f6, and there is a threat on g7, a mate threat. A possible defense could be knight to e6, defending g7, but in that case the solution is very simple: knight to d4, and followed by taking on e6. And also here, if the other knight comes to defend g7, then of course again we simply take away all the defenders, and then we can checkmate on g7. So let's return now to where we left, and that's here. So instead of f takes e5, black played knight to f5, attacking the queen and defending g7, and it will be no surprise what the reply was of white: rook takes f5, all meant to dominate the dark squares. So this knight that was defending dark squares is taking off the board immediately. After g takes f5, knight takes f6 was played, and rook takes f6, e takes f6. Now the next move of black is knight to e6, so trying to defend the focal point g7, and again white continues with this idea of taking off the board the defenders with knight to f4, so now threatening knight takes e6. Queen to b7 was played. Smart move. If now knight takes e6, f takes e6, so like this, f takes e6, and then the queen would be defending g7. So that's the idea of queen to b7, and white played here a very beautiful move, and that is bishop to a3, again controlling the dark squares. Now the idea is to place the bishop on e7, blocking the 7th rank, so then threatening knight takes e6. And that's exactly what happened in the game. Black played bishop to c6, and after bishop to e7, black resigned. There is no way of saving the game now. The threat knight takes e6 is deadly. For example, if king to h8, for example, then simply the knight takes on e6, and if rook to g8 to defend g7. There are several ways to win, but a very beautiful one is either knight to g5 or knight to f8. So now a new focal point arises, the h7 pawn. Okay, I hope you enjoyed this example, and I find this so well and beautifully played, so consistent play by Tartakower on this dark square strategy.